Hi, welcome back. This is part two on our series, Becoming Cloud Native, What to Do When Your Public Sector Org Wasn't Born in the Cloud. And here we'll be covering tips 6 through 10. So, tip number 6 is about letting the platform do the hard stuff. I have found this to be a fairly canonical book and one that I've referenced for years now. And I want to highlight, from this title on cloud architecture patterns, I want to highlight 9 patterns that I believe in, uh, and one that is kind of an anti-pattern that I've run into. And so, thinking about horizontal as opposed to vertical scale, one of the major changes that you make to how you deliver infrastructure in the cloud versus a data center is typically in approaching things more horizontally as far as how you scale them. Containers were still relatively novel or less well known or well established at the point that the book was being written, but a lot of things are easily containerized as concepts. So that's good to highlight. The anti-pattern, I think, is important to highlight here, that network is not actually an infinite resource. So I've seen many designs that somewhat abstracted the network and made it as though it might be infinitely elastic, and it's certainly not that. And there are many cases where, in terms of latency, in terms of throughput, it's really important to think through the requirements that your application and your services will have from a networking perspective, and make sure that you're as proactive as possible about those. Things like ephemerality, being queue-centric, not allowing any transient failures to degrade your user experience are certainly important, as is eventual consistency. So one of the hurdles that you have to clear when you move toward a cloud native approach is really recognizing that from a database perspective, you're not really ACID, you're more base. And that means being basically available and really having a variety of things that can add up to, calculating a final answer later in the processing, being able to serve up, a somewhat interim answer earlier in the process. And this is just kind of a distributed systems challenge that comes up, quite a bit. One of the ways that you can do that is really around recognizing the opportunities that you have for caching and looking at not necessarily putting as much load on a single master database server, and really looking to have other servers involved in serving responses, and up to and including being able to cache answers for the application in a variety of different ways, whether that's a caching tier, whether it's something that the application is responsible for, or what have you. And then in terms of cloud readiness, just in general, we can certainly lift and shift just about anything. If it can run in a VMware environment, it can certainly run in a cloud environment. But really thinking through cloud readiness in terms of being ready, willing, and able to refactor our applications to be more cloud native is certainly important, and important work to do. And then, as I quote here around letting the platform do the hard stuff, it's very, very important, and I think key to really being able to accelerate what we're doing in a cloud native picture, that we not try to reinvent wheels, that when it comes to reliability, when it comes to stability, when it comes to security, that we don't necessarily have to do a lot of coding to start taking advantage of things that would make our systems N+1 as far as redundancy, and as far as a variety of security techniques that we might want to take on. We don't necessarily have to do all of that work ourselves, and we really should be looking to build and maintain platforms that are going to do a lot of that hard work for us. So another benchmark that we like to use when we talk about becoming cloud native is really the well-architected framework by AWS. So I'm not going to read all of this, but I do want to highlight from an automation perspective in particular just how frequently the concepts around automation do come up. So performing operations as code, being able to make small, frequent, and reversible changes, the key being reversible, being able to back out of anything that you did, change, very, very important, very helpful, and certainly critical that we do that through automation if we're going to do it consistently. From a security perspective, in terms of just general testing of business continuity and other recovery procedures, being able to automatically recover from failure, being able to, not necessarily go global from a public sector perspective. It's not really a thing, but in terms of being able to go multi-region, very important to be able to do that. And also just having a culture of experimentation, right? Being in a position where we can try things without having to make big budgetary commitments to those solutions being the solutions that we'll go forward with at real scale. The next pro tip is around not just containerizing microservices, but orchestrating them. And we touched on this in the first video, but really can't overstate how important it is to be thinking about containerization in terms of orchestration, in terms of what you need for a larger org that has more enterprise type requirements. And when we look at what we're asking of a platform, we really are asking for it to be as cloud agnostic as possible. We want to be able to go in either a multi-cloud or a hybrid cloud direction if we want to do that from an agency perspective, or really to work with other sister agencies and so forth. We absolutely want it to be API driven. We want it to have advanced networking support, service discovery, things like that you don't necessarily just get those automatically out of an upstream Kubernetes project. You certainly don't just get them just because you're running containers somewhere. And being able to also provide things like persistent storage support. Some of us who have been working with Docker for a while remember when it wasn't officially supported to have anything that would run like a database or anything that had persistent storage requirements. We've come a long way since then, and Kubernetes in general, OpenShift in particular, have really been leading the way on allowing for some of those design patterns to be introduced into not just the world, but really into production grade environments. And the reason why this is so important, it's one of those things that until you really get into working with containers at scale, you may not actually recognize the importance of this. But if you look at various reporting on this, this is a screenshot from Sysdig that shows just how short-lived containers tend to be in an SOA or microservices-based environment. They're really not, you don't typically just build a container and have it run for 6 months. You don't build a pod from an OpenShift Kubernetes perspective and just have it run for months and months at a time. It's usually the case that they're being rebuilt very frequently. And so we need to be ready for that. And then again, that really means orchestration in general. The next tip is really also kind of recognizing the opportunity with legacy apps. So the reality is that we can rarely actually kind of declare bankruptcy on our legacy apps and just ignore them or anything else. We have to really incorporate them as much as practical into everything that we're doing. And so being that they are a reality, we would look to integrate them into our overall cloud picture. And there are a variety of approaches to this. Red Hat's actually got an excellent ebook on this that really highlights a number of things that can be done. And the notion around having fast monoliths and looking for any opportunities to make legacy architectures a little bit more modular, being able to containerize those and once again bring those into a container orchestration approach like OpenShift, very, very helpful. And being just in general, the goal, we may not be able to get there with every legacy app, but the goal should be to try to do at least some of the work to bring things more consistently while those legacy apps continue to be with us. The next tip is really just trying to recognize that the old build versus buy question. It's almost always both. And it's certainly important to understand that if we don't do either, we're sort of stuck with business as usual, and that's probably not going to be good enough for our organizations. The key word here is really around integration and recognizing that no single tool is ever going to be able to solve all of our problems. This is the Cloud Native Computing Foundation's landscape, and it's got quite a number of cards on it that all represent different products in the Cloud Native ecosystem. There's a lot here. And the reality for us is that every organization is unique in the sense that everybody picks slightly different products and has different people working in them, and so the challenges are somewhat unique in that regard. And so we can apply best practices, but it's not the end of the discussion, certainly. And being in a position where we realize that it's our organization, our cloud, our rules, and how do we go about nevertheless finding integration points that really work for everybody's concerns and everybody's goals. Very, very important to do. The 10th and final tip for this video, and we've got one more to go, is just recognizing that this is really very much a team effort. When we talk about becoming cloud native, it's really important that we not try to put this on one cloud engineer or one DevOps person or what have you. This is another benchmark from AWS around the cloud transformation maturity model. And just realize this is like an eye chart, and I'm not trying to read all of this, but basically there's a lot to this. There's a lot that we have to consider around our challenges, around what AWS would call our transformation activities, and also really about being able to know where we are in the process. What are the milestones that we're looking at? How do we score those? What are the KPIs for those? There's a lot here. And so, being in a position where, we're, from our perspective as a systems integrator, that we're trying to pre-optimize as much as we can around costs, around services, around the application environments, and so on. And recognizing that as we continue to come back to that, automation is really almost like a skeleton key as far as what it can do, and the things that it can allow us to start doing, and the doors that it can help us walk through. Very, very important to just never really entirely, let that out of our minds. From an automation perspective, that is usually the first and ongoing way that we're going to solve our way through whatever it is that we have in front of us. So that's all for part 2. Please be sure to check out part 3.